Caterpillars in the peas. In Creole, there is this saying which goes like this: Chinia a pois, which literally translated means there are caterpillars in the peas, or there are caterpillars in the pea grove. So, if you were having a conversation with someone and the person explained and said, there are caterpillars in the peas, or chinia a pois in Creole, it would mean somebody detected that there is something wrong, that caterpillars has infiltrated the pea pod and by extension the whole pea grove. So I'll give you an example. If somebody said, oh my, something seems wrong with a situation, and one of the friends hanging out in the group shouted, chinia a pois, or it seems that there are caterpillars in the peas, it only means that something is terribly wrong and there is a problem with caterpillars in the peas, or caterpillars have infiltrated the whole pea grove. It is said that pea moth caterpillars feed inside pea pods, but the damage is often only spotted at harvest. Consequently, the pods need to be shelled with great care to avoid contamination. So, when you hear that refrain, there are caterpillars in the peas, it simply means that the ecosystem has been contaminated and changes must be made and care must be taken, because the contagion could spread and affect everyone and everything, or in other words, the whole pea grove. So, we are going to use this caterpillar in the peas analogy to examine the G20 forum, which is just taking place, or has just taken place by the time you see this video. So, the G20 members are Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, South Korea, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. And the United States, Spain, is an invited permanent guest. At the 2023 G20 summit, China's Xi Jinping will not be present. CNN Hong Kong states that Xi Jinping has never missed a G20 summit since taking power in 2012. Another article by CNBC states that PM Modi is disappointed that China and Russia has skipped the G20 summit. That is allegedly said by the US, but PM Modi is saying it, and this is a CNBC. Russian President Vladimir Putin is not attending the G20 summit for the second straight year following his invasion of Ukraine, while Chinese President Xi Jinping also did not travel to India amid growing tensions between Beijing and New Delhi, the article states. But let's get back to the saying that there is a caterpillar in the peas, or caterpillars has infiltrated the peas. So something is amiss, because the G20 summit not only has the leader of China, Xi Jinping, refused to attend right after they had a summit of the BRICS and expand that bloc to compete with the G20 and G7. However, it is interesting to look at what stance that India is taking as a leader of the global south, with an expressed interest to be the new leader of the global south, and possibly China recognizing that there is a conflict in the grouping of BRICS, or in other words, there may be an infiltration in the pea grove, and therefore this is why I have stated there may be caterpillars in the peas, or problems brewing in the midst of the BRICS grouping. An article in the Economic Times states G20, how India emerged as the voice of the global south. And it states on the synopsis, India, during its presidency of the G20, has prioritized being the voice of the global south and has taken action to raise concerns. An article in The Hill states, India tries to be the voice of the global south. The article goes on to explain that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as host of the G20 summit in Delhi and coming on the heels of the BRICS summit, is eager to fulfill his proclaimed desire of making India the voice of the global south. As the world's most populous country and one of the fastest growing economies, India seeks to reflect the interest of the vast majority that does not live in the industrialized northern half of the globe. So, the G20 kicks off right on the heels of the BRICS. Now, the BRICS has admitted 4 new members, making a splash. But would you believe that the G20 has admitted the African Union? And the headline states from the ABC News, the African Union is joining the G20, a powerful acknowledgement of the continent of 1 billion people. The decision by the group of 20 of the world's leading economies to admit the African Union as a permanent member is a powerful acknowledgement of Africa and its more than 50 countries as they seek a more important role on the global stage. So the G20 admits the African Union as permanent members at New Delhi. This is no small peanuts, well, no small peas. But cue the Scooby-Doo, what do you mean? So recently, the BRICS grouping, which want to put up a front door fight against the Western Alliance, invited Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE to join them in January of 2024. But instead, the G20 has one-upped them with 50 of them by admitting the African Union of 50 countries into the grouping. The African Union has been invited to become a permanent member of the G20 as Prime Minister of India Modi has announced at the G20 summit on September 9th, 2023. As we can see in this headline, Prime Minister Modi is congratulating, or they're sharing a moment with the African Union leader. The two of them are sharing a moment after the announcement that the African Union will be becoming a permanent member of the G20 grouping. This is a very big deal because now that the African Union has become a member of the G20, the only other grouping that is a union of the G20 is the European Union. So here we have it, that right after the BRICS has announced members joining them so that they can enlarge their world population base with adding different countries, the African Union is now becoming or being invited to be a member of a G20. So it is like the G20 has one-upped the BRICS grouping: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Well, not one up, but actually 50 up, because the African Union is 50 member countries that are going to be joining the G20 grouping. So cue the surprise emojis, or even the Scooby-Doo, whoa, what did you say? Yes, the G20 has invited the African Union to become a permanent member. Now, coming on the heels, like I said, of the BRICS announcement of their expansion, This is really a big deal. So, at the BRICS summit, which preceded the G20 summit, the BRICS grouping invited 6 new members, and these were Saudi Arabia, Iran, Ethiopia, Egypt, Argentina, and the United Arab Emirates. They were all invited to join in January of 2024. Let's provide a little bit of background context to these whole G20 and BRICS summits going on. So prior to both those summits taking place, there was a word that was bandied around called friendshoring. You may be all familiar with the idea of friendshoring, or as Wikipedia explains, allied shoring, which means the act of manufacturing and sourcing from countries that are geopolitically allies or geopolitical allies, which makes it a synonym for trade. So in other words, friendshoring is when you move your manufacturing to so-called allies or your friends and take them away from what you would probably consider to be your enemies. So sometime in the news before, after COVID-19, it was reported that a lot of the manufacturing companies, conglomerates, would be moving their manufacturing bases away from China and were looking for a new home. And India was the country that came up on the radar to become the destination of friendshoring. Here is a headline for you from July 17, 2023. It states that Yellen sees India as an indispensable for friendshoring. Okay, so that is the one of the United States leading figures, Secretary of the Treasury, mentioning what they think of India when it comes to friendshoring. Here is an interesting headline for you. China and India battle for leadership of the global south. So we do know that China has been having a battle for influence and also global recognition and leadership against the West or America and its Western allies. And the BRICS was supposed to be a platform for which China, which had the most influence in, would be able to assert itself and consolidate a group of countries together to rival or to take on the Western alliance. And they were also going to be using or being friending the African continent or the African countries as allies, as China has been very active in providing loans and infrastructural development on the African continent to numerous African countries. So we know that through the BRICS that China is looking to assert its influence by using the BRICS as a platform, and India is a member of the BRICS. We also know that India is a member of the G20 alliance as well as China. China did not attend this year's G20 summit, and India is hosting. And India and China can be said to be competing against each other for leadership of the global south. It can be said that maybe the Western alliance has thrown their support behind India because they are, like I said, pointed out previously, there are certain issues like friendshoring or that has been proven where support has been taken away or manufacturing will be taken away from China and be brought over to India. Have you heard about the Quad? What is the Quadrilateral? Quadrilateral, known as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, QSD. The Quad is an informal strategic forum comprising 4 nations, namely the United States of America, USA, India, Australia, and Japan. One of the primary objectives of the Quad is to work for a free, open, prosperous, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region, as stated by the Business Standard. So this is very important. So you have India being a member of the BRICS, India being courted by the Western alliance through friendshoring, military alliances, and at the same time, you have the West having economic kind of war or battle against China, as well as technological rivalry against China. The Huawei saga is one example. So you could research the Huawei saga, and also many chip wars, or the fighting of not having chip technology made accessible to China for manufacturing. Here's the headline which states that India tries to be the voice of the global south. The headline reads, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as host of the G20 summit in Delhi and coming on the heels of the BRICS summit, is eager to fulfill his proclaimed desire of making India the voice of the global south. As the world's most populous country and one of the fastest growing economies, India seeks to reflect the interest of the vast majority that does not live in the industrialized northern half of the globe. The industrialized northern half of the globe. So, India seeks to be the voice of the global south. So, to wrap up, we know that China and Africa have a very important relationship. It has been spoken about the West saying that China is using depth trap diplomacy and neocolonialism in Africa. Africa is very important to China, as this article states. Check out the headline over here. China-Africa relations are the bedrock of China's foreign policy. So here we have it. You have this idea that China is trying to consolidate the power of the global south under its banner, or to create a group to rival the Western alliance, also to increase its influence globally, and to give it partners and allegiances to combat the attacks that has been taking place against China's growth and China's economic and technological development. This can be seen, as I said, in the trade wars, in the technological wars, which are all directed towards China. So Africa has always been important to China with the Belt and Road Initiative, and also a place where they've invested quite a lot in Africa. Now the West have signaled that they are concerned that the Chinese influence in Africa is getting too strong or too important, and so we probably expected them to have some geopolitical moves. So this G20 summit has just proven to us something very important is happening. And by that I mean we saw the signals that India was probably an avenue that the West would use to fracture the BRICS grouping, or to use India as a barrier or bulwark against China. And so these new revelations, or coming out of the G20, that the African Union will now be a member of the G20, must not sit very well with China. So let's wrap up. We started off with this concept of there are caterpillars in the peas. By that I mean the West have infiltrated or have set up plans in motion to try and break up or influence the BRICS alliances in a negative way, or to affect them negatively. It looks like they have, or it seems that they were going to try and go through the route of having India to be closer to them in an allegiance by friendshoring, by doing the Quad, and certain geostrategic moves. By that, they know India is part of the BRICS nation alliance, and India is one of the second most populous country after China, or one of the two with China and India. And with China and India being partners together, that was a very heavy population tilt. So if they can pry away India away from allegiance with China, that would be quite a significant strategic move. So I thought the approach would have been, or it seemed like the approach would have just been to try and get India over to their side. But it also seems like now that they have invited or put the African continent into the G20, it might seem that not only are they prying India away from the BRICS or trying to make some geopolitical strategic moves of separating India from the grouping, they are also trying to somehow entice the African continent away from China as well, nations. So as we said, the original idea was there are caterpillars in the peas, which is a Creole proverb which goes, there are chiniens en poire, just to analyze and look at the idea of how the West has infiltrated the whole idea of the strategic policy of China, or affecting how the BRICS nations are doing, are coming together to try and create a grouping that will rival the Western Alliance. So now you have this new revelation that Africa is now going to become part of the G20. You have China probably not being too happy because Xi Jinping did not attend the G20 summit of 2023, which India is the host and the leader of. They've opted not to come, and now you have at that summit an announcement that the African Union, 50 members, will now become a full-fledged, invited to become a full-fledged member of the G20. So all that must not sit very well, or it signals the idea that there's a full all-out barrage on China's advancement through the BRICS, its influence in Africa, and yes, it signals that there are caterpillars in the peas. If you do like the content, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and we will bring you a lot more. Thank you very much for listening.